Hello, everybody. It is Saturday, September the 21st, 2024. I hope you're all listening on a Saturday at home rather than the office. Certainly, people at Amazon, if they enjoy this show, might be listening from the office. The news today from the Wall Street Journal is, to quote from the Journal, the work from home free for all is coming to an end. The Amazon CEO just called everyone back to the office full time. Amazon, of course, isn't the only company, but a very influential central employer in symbolically and literally in America's new economy. One person I don't think will be too bothered by the fact that Amazon has called everyone back to the office is my guest today, Megan Hellerer. She's a life coach. She did graduate from Stanford and worked for a while at Google, but now she works from home. She's joining us from the Hudson Valley near the beautiful town of Hudson, and she's the author of a book called Directional Living, a transformational guide to fulfillment in work and life, which of course does not involve going to work for a big corporation like Amazon. Megan, congratulations on the book. It's out on Tuesday. It already can be pre-ordered. What's your reaction to this Amazon news? Does it surprise you? You know corporate America. You worked in it for 10 years. Does it confirm your greatest fears?
So thank you so much for having me today, Andrew. And I actually want to go back to something you said, that fulfillment in work and life may not mean or doesn't mean working at Amazon or a company like Amazon. And while perhaps that's often the case, I don't know that I would universally say that. For me, as you mentioned, I worked at Google and was really unhappy, even though it was the quote unquote dream job, which is sort of the beginning of how all of my work in this book came about. But I don't think Google was the problem. I wouldn't say for me it was not fulfilling. It wasn't the work that I meant to do in the world, but that's not to say that it isn't for other people who work at Google. So I guess that's the first thing I would say. In terms of, I don't think fulfillment there's not a universal fulfillment, and I don't think you can know whether something's fulfilling or not if you're not that person. So it's completely individual and sort of bespoke from that perspective. But in terms of the news today, does it surprise me? It's an interesting choice. I guess I wouldn't say it surprises me. It's an interesting choice because I don't know if that's a great employee retention strategy. It seems to me that, especially coming from my corner of the room and the people I'm talking to, most people, especially in tech, but most people are looking for purpose and fulfillment in their work. I shouldn't say especially in tech, but in corporate land, if you're going into tech, many people are in part there because there's something about working in technology that feels optimistic and promising and innovative and creative. And that's a lot of the reason that people go to these sorts of companies. So when there are these sort of inflexible policies put in place that don't necessarily feel forward looking or forward thinking, I am a bit surprised, and I wonder what the logic behind that is. But I also suppose, I guess I know what the logic behind it is, but I wonder the cost benefit that they're running on that. But I suppose if you're the Amazons of the world or the Googles of the world, and this was something that, I also experienced when I was there, so many people want to work at that company that you are kind of in a privileged position where you can make these sorts of policies and decisions that aren't necessarily in the best interest of your employees. And many people will look the other way, at least for a short amount of time. But I don't know that that's the way that I would suggest if you're looking to promote fulfilling work, let's say.
You use the term, Megan, cost benefit. That, of course, is classic economic utility, perhaps inherited from the thinking of late 18th century philosophers like Jeremy Bentham, that our goal as humans is to maximize our pleasure and minimize our pain. It seems to be the rule of the new economy, and that's why we all shop at Amazon. Is that the right metric philosophy to use for life itself? Or perhaps maybe rephrase this question. You spent a long part of your life, I think, perhaps believing, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the cost benefit analysis, this philosophy at Stanford and then at Google. Is that fair? And did you, or have you thought your way out of it with directional living?
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly a fair assessment of how I used to view life. And I would say that it was really, many of us were raised or programmed, and coming from various systemic things. We could say late stage capitalism, what have you. But
It's
that
always been late stage ever since Marx started writing about it in the middle of the 19th century.
yes. So capitalism, whatever yes, however we want to refer to it. But I think the key, the what I call the achievement lie is what I bought into. And perhaps you could use it in the terms of cost benefit analysis. But the achievement lie that I've discovered many, at least millennials, have been taught and programmed that that achievement is the path to fulfillment. That if you achieve enough, you will be successful and therefore you will be fulfilled. And many of us found out the hard way that that is not true, that achievement doesn't inherently yield fulfillment. And so that is the way that I used to view the world, and what I now call destinational living. And the way I look at the world now, having basically had a breakdown with that belief system, and then also
You mean a mental breakdown or a physical one?
both, actually. Yes, I was extremely depressed, really anxious, having daily panic attacks, and was very ill. And then that started to have physical ramifications as well. And still, I was trying to show up to work every day. And really, the only thing that got me to actually leave was that it felt like it would be unprofessional, or not good for my career to have to sort of break down in public, so to speak, when I really felt like my work product couldn't handle it anymore. But there was no personal consequences that felt too much to me to like stay on that ladder. So yeah.
So, Megan, maybe these questions might be slightly personal, but it's a personal book, a personal narrative.
Yeah, bring it.
Talk about being programmed. In an ideal sense, I always assumed people who got into universities like Stanford and excelled as you did were people who enjoyed studying, who got great pleasure out of education, and then they go and work at a place like Google and got pleasure out of the intellectual challenges and opportunities, as well as, of course, the high pay. In terms of your own life, do you get a sense that you were programmed to go to Stanford, to excel there, to almost come out almost with a 4.0 GPA, and then go and work at Google where everyone else wants to work? Do you blame your parents, your culture, your advisors when you were a teenager?
No, I don't blame anyone for this in particular. I do think so. I do think there's something inherent, and this I'm very grateful for. I had an amazing education, and I do love learning, and I do get excited and take pleasure out of studying and books and learning and philosophy.
What was your major, by the way, at Stanford?
International relations. It was an
Ah.
interdisciplinary major. I had wanted to be a creative writing major, but it did not seem practical enough to me. So I went in a different direction. But yeah, so not relevant to Google or technology. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think I was, part of it, it's a nature and nurture thing. I think I inherently, and that's one of the reasons why I think I could get excited about working at Google in the beginning, even though it didn't feel like the best fit even on day one for me. But I could get excited about learning anything new. And so that was something that actually kept me there. And I don't regret that experience. I think it was really important and foundational to me in terms of, the work I'm doing now, my ability to help other people, my ability to build a business for myself. It was basically, a free MBA being there. And it was an incredible, even now looking back at it, sort of this like sociological experiment of being at Google at that early stage when Mountain View was the only office that they even had at that point. So there was a lot to be said about
What
it.
years were you at Google, Megan?
2006 to 2014.
And what did you do? Which department were you in?
I had several different jobs while I was there, but I started actually under many levels below, but under Sheryl Sandberg in her sales operations organization, like basically the AdWords and AdSense organization, doing kind of like glorified customer service actually. And then I moved over and became what they call a strategic partner manager. So I worked on a few of our emerging products, which were things like print ads and TV ads. At the time, we were thinking about going to traditional media and taking sort of all of the information all of the data and measurability that we had from online and bringing it over to traditional media, which had mixed success, but all of those products don't exist anymore. And eventually moved over to mobile. So working on some of our like commerce products.
So you were always in the right place, it seems, at the right time. Some people might be watching this and thinking, this woman could afford to have her breakdown. She must have made a lot of money at Google. She did 10 years there and she left and now has reinvented herself. Would that be a fair critique?
That I could afford to have my breakdown. I mean, certainly there's an element of privilege in this. And I would say, I guess there's two ways to look at that. One, yes, I sold a bunch of Google stock in order to allow me to have this sort of like mini sabbatical, self-imposed sabbatical, in order to try to, find my way, rediscover myself, figure out how to sort of find fulfillment. And I thought I was going to be going back to corporate. And I certainly have, some resources regarding that, but nobody was like funding me. I had no income. And more than that, psychologically, I was terrified. Like not having health insurance, not having an income, not knowing, I wasn't like sitting on piles of money. So yes, I had enough to be able to make it work, but not too much longer than the amount of time that it took me to figure it out. So yes, this is not something that everyone can do. I didn't even know if I could do it. So I guess it's a fair critique. My goal in writing this book and doing this work, though, is that I really think there's so much suffering that is inevitable in life, and your work in the world, suffering in your work in the world and in your career is not one of those things. I don't think that especially to the point that it got for me, I don't think that is inevitable. And I would like it that no one has to have a costly breakdown. No one has to have the privilege to be able to have a breakdown. Take a sabbatical if you want, and if you can afford it, and do it because you enjoy it, or you get to, have these experiences that you're really looking to have outside of your workplace. But don't do it because, you have to, like, your body isn't going to let you, isn't giving you another choice.
Yeah, there's a piece in the Times this morning featuring Sally Rooney, who's a part of your generation, I think, a relatively similar age, very successful young Irish writer. And the interview is entitled, "Sally Rooney Thinks Career Growth is Overrated." And some people might say, well, she would say that. Is it a generational thing, Megan? I mean, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Sally Rooney, but there seems to be a general unease. You use the word anxiety. A lot of people talk about this, both clinically and otherwise, within your generation, about life in general, particularly corporate life and work and relationships, of course.
Yeah, I don't know if it's unique, like exclusive to my generation and perhaps generations after me, but I would say that I think there are beliefs that were in place that potentially worked or were tolerable for generations previously. Again, these ideas of, you can get a job that is a good job and you'll be set for life, and you'll, stay there until one company until you retire, and you'll have a pension or whatever those things are. That world, that doesn't exist anymore. So we were all sort of taught the rules to this game that doesn't really exist, if it ever did.
When you say we were taught, what does that mean? Who taught you?
Yeah, I think again, I mean, sort of like society,
Yeah.
or cultural. I think there's the paradigm around career that I have found, or that I experience, and that I feel like most of my sort of overachieving peers inherited or absorbed. I don't think anyone ever sat us down. Like my parents did never sit me down and say, "If you want to be fulfilled, like go achieve." It's something more that we absorbed, and so yes, I don't think there's a single source, but just sort of culture in general, had, created this sort of like achievement chasing mentality. And at least, again, for this subsect of people who I focus on, which are overachievers. But there's been so much made of this, millennial burnout. There have been so many books about this.
Yeah.
There's definitely something that's happening, and the quarter life crisis, right? There's definitely something that is happening in my generation. And
Yeah, you call yourself an underfulfilled overachiever, which I'm guessing all overachievers feel underfulfilled because that's what being an overachiever is, isn't it?
yes, but overachiever, actually, many people think that's a compliment, or many overachievers think that's a compliment. And so, one of the things instead of like excessive or compulsive achieving, which is what it really is implying, and a negative thing, I really have to teach people that I work with, like, actually, this isn't a compliment. Overachieving, people think it's like going above and beyond, which is something that's lauded and glorified in most companies. You would get awards for going above and beyond at Google all the time. So, it was like, working above and beyond what was normal or capable. And so there was this competition that comes with that. And that was really considered going above and beyond, being a hard worker. That was the thing that was going to get you ahead, which was what was going to get you success, which is what was going to get you fulfillment. And I think that is to some extent unique to my generation, in the sense that I feel like that worked, or was plausible to believe in that narrative, in maybe in the 80s and 90s, in times of economic abundance and relative political stability, at least domestically in the US, or in the Western world. But as millennials came of age, graduated into the, many people graduated into the 2008 financial crisis, were in actually graduating from high school, or in high school for 9/11, and then the political instability and everything that's been going on since then here, with the civil unrest, and so many things like that, that I think this idea, and then COVID, of course, right, which disrupted so many norms. And so I think this idea that like things would be predictable, and there was a safe way, or like a easy linear trajectory that you could get on board with, and then just sort of follow that escalator to the top, which many of us, however we gained that information, or learned that, or absorbed that, we did. And while that was plausible perhaps before, it's less believable now. And to believe in this destinational thinking, which is what I call this old way of doing things, right? And I believe that underfulfilled overachievers are people who believe in this old, are practicing this destinational thinking, where the focus is all on the destinations, the finish lines, being really outcome oriented. And that is the key differentiator to me that I found, in terms of flipping underfulfilled overachieverness to fulfilled achieverness. And this destinational thinking is the thing that has really gotten us in trouble.
Well, and
But
I want to get to why destinational thinking, why directional living as opposed to thinking is different from destinational thinking. You've talked about being an underfulfilled overachiever. You also mentioned when you started at Google, you worked in the group headed up by Sheryl Sandberg, who of course then went on to be Mark Zuckerberg's number 2 at Facebook. She also wrote Leaning In, a very influential woman, both in Silicon Valley, broader in business, but also in terms of female empowerment. You're obviously a woman. Is there a gendered quality here to underfulfilled overachievers, people who perhaps work a little too hard, who put too much pressure on themselves? Do you find as many young men and women in this situation, or do you think it's a particular feature of women like yourself?
I have people, both men and women, coming to me in my courses and for private coaching. And so I don't think it's exclusively a gendered situation. I think potentially, women or do feel potentially like they need to work harder to compensate for some of those things. And so they may feel they have less mobility or flexibility or less ability to choose fulfillment for a variety of reasons, but it's not exclusive to women. My practice over indexes on women, but it's hard to say whether that's, because it's self-selecting and I'm a woman, and so people, women are interested in working with me more than men, or if that is true of the general population. But I have talked to many, many men who have this experience.
You talk about something called the achievement lie. I mean, I'm not sure everyone would agree with that. People who achieve don't consider it a lie. Some do, some don't. You didn't. Maybe it's a myth in some ways, or a myth for some people. It's a sales pitch, as you suggest, and we all believe in it. Some of us are disappointed. Some of us are fulfilled. Why is what you're writing in Directional Living no more or less than a sales pitch? You're in the business of selling books. You're a career coach, particularly for people like yourself. Why should people believe or trust you any more than they would trust the people who come up with the achievement lie?
Oh, I love this question. Yeah, I mean, I could tell you, like, I'm not interested in just selling books, but I will give you the answer.
And I'm not suggesting you are, but
No, I
part of
understand,
it
but
is.
it's a useful inquiry for people, right? Why would they trust me? And I didn't take that personally at all. I guess the couple things that I would say are, one, I created this for myself. I hope my own story can offer some level of trust in that I have been where people are who are struggling with this, and this is what helped me to get out of this. And then not only that, but I've then worked for the past 10 years with hundreds of people, helping them apply these same principles to their own lives, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So there are actual examples of people who apply this, and I talk about them in the book. Some by name, and others are sort of vignettes or more anonymous, but certainly there are examples of this working. And I would say that nobody should like blindly trust me, or trust anyone for that matter. But I think if you are in a position where you are struggling with fulfillment, you feel like you've done all the right things, you've checked all the boxes, you do not know where else to turn, like I was, or you're just starting to feel it around the edges, or something isn't making sense, and you're looking for another way to do things, give this a try, is what I would say. You can always go back to your misery or the way that you were doing things before if you find that this doesn't work for you or it doesn't make sense. And so that is, I guess, the way that I would suggest it. I didn't come up with this in order to sell books. I came up with this to save my life. And I sort of stumbled into it. And for me, being able to write a book, to be able to share with people, and to hopefully help people not have to go through the same thing that I went through, to me is my mission. And I couldn't not what I had discovered and what I learned. And this to me feels like my life's work. So even just having written the book, like having it as an offering to people, that was my goal. And to me, that is success.
I remember a few years ago, Megan, I used to know a young fellow who wasn't famous at the time, Tim Ferriss, before he wrote the 4-Hour Work Week. Then he became very famous. Perhaps you will be the new Tim Ferriss, maybe with this new book, Directional Living. And there was always a criticism of people like Ferriss and other writers in this space. It's a very lucrative space. Adam Grant, for example, who actually is blurbing your book, that they're selling a dream, that the 1 in 1,000, it's like selling a lottery ticket. There's always going to be winners, but they're a small proportion. Do you feel that Directional Living is, for better or worse, a dream? I mean, what proportion of your clients, your customers, actually get to fulfill a more meaningful life?
I would say 100%. of the people who actually like do the work and apply this and are sort of ready and willing to. And I don't think
So it
this is
can't fail. It's a no-fail formula here.
I would say that it is, because here is the thing about it. This works for everyone. Wherever you're starting, it's not contingent on resources or anything like that, because the whole premise is we want to switch our focus from being driven by external norms and destinations to being driven by internal norms. So the key thing for fulfillment in my book is becoming more aligned. And I'm talking to you about how to do that. And that's traditionally something that many of us have seen as a distraction from the main thing we're trying to do. So it's things like following your curiosity. You can do that no matter where you're starting. You could start that with like in your daily decisions, what you're having for dinner, what exercise class you're doing, what TV show you're going to watch. Any of those things are going to be a step closer. And what I'm selling, so to speak, right? What I'm telling you, what I'm offering here is not like 100% fulfillment. You're never going to have anything that you don't like doing in your life ever again.
You still have to do the washing up, right?
You still have to do what?
You still have to do the washing up
Yes, exactly.
and clean the bathroom.
Yes, exactly. But here's the thing, like the goal with directional living is that we are getting closer and closer to having less things we don't feel are aligned and more things that are. I would not say, for example, necessarily that doing chores is not aligned for you. This isn't about never doing anything you don't like to do. I don't particularly love invoicing, right? But my why for doing it is that's part of what allows me to have a business and serve the clients that I'm serving. And that I do really care about. So there are ways I can make it better. I could outsource it, whatever those things are. But that alignment is sort of a broader, more holistic way of looking at things. So I'm not promising you're going to have the perfect life. And in fact, the whole premise of the book is that would be destinational. We think that there's this destination we get to where we're then complete. And the whole idea here is that we're going to be in process. We're going to be living directionally and evolving our whole lives. There is no there. So we're not going to be complete. We're not looking for that end goal of fulfillment. Fulfillment to me is a feeling of I'm doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now, but that's going to change tomorrow and the next day. I don't know that I'll be coaching clients for the rest of my life, but I know that's fulfilling for me right now. And with directional living framework, that's allowed to evolve.
How do we know what we want? One of the things you suggest is, in terms of your own life, I was living a great life. It just wasn't my life. I just saw an interesting movie. I'm not sure if you've seen it. Will and Harper. It's a film featuring Will Ferris and Harper Steele, who changed sexes. A former Saturday Night Live screenwriter, and the narrative in the movie is that Harper Steele always said that they never felt, or she never felt like a man. And it essentially undermined her life for much of it while she was a man. So this idea of, and it occurred to me in terms of your notion of my life. I mean, clearly Harper Steele had a sense of what her life should be. Is that true for most of us? Do we have something in us? I mean, it's a sort of anti-Lockean notion that we're born with something that makes us who we are.
Yeah, so I think,
and I'm not just talking about your gender.
Right.
It's
Yeah. If they're anything like related to career or, yeah. So I would say, I don't know that I believe that like we're born with a blueprint that's like, this is what you need to become or something along those lines. But I do, that's like very locked in. Again, to me, that would be this like all or nothing destinational mentality that a lot of us actually do get stuck in that of like, I have to find my life purpose and I have to figure it out and then I'm going to be fulfilled. And that also is this like destinational thinking where you figure it out and you're done. But I do think that notion of, for in the case of this movie, being of the wrong gender, or for me, like being in the wrong career, or people have that sense of like, this isn't the right relationship for me, or how did I get here? And you feel sort of like you're masking, or you're performing, or you're going through the motions, and you're living, I don't know if it's someone else's life, but it's certainly not your life. That was more, I don't mean it as literally, but that was my experience. I felt like I was sort of watching myself perform some role. And I think it sounds like a lot of, this is the same thing in the movie. And so I do think that there are things that are aligned and not aligned for us. I don't know if there's like I don't know that there's like a destiny involved in that, or some sort of bottom touchstone of what that looks like. And as I said, I don't think there's like a there, but I do, it comes back to authenticity. And I do think that part of our job as humans is to become who we are. And that is an exploration and
well, that believes, I mean, the idea that we are, or that our job as humans is to become who we are, it believes in the idea of the authentic. Some people would question that. It's interesting that the Will and Harper movie is a road trip, which is a kind of journey. So let's get to directional living, Megan. You've been very good natured in some of my critiques. What exactly is it? Is it a journey, or should you describe it in different language? Because destinational thinking, of course, is a journey. You go from the East Coast to the West Coast, from New York to San Francisco. What exactly is directional living?
So I would describe it as a philosophy, actually, an approach to life. But I love that you mentioned the road trip, because actually one of the best ways, at least, to describe directional living to me is this quote by E.L. Doctorow. And he was talking about writing a novel, but I think it applies so well here. And it is, it's like driving a car at night. You can only see as far as the headlights in front of you, but you can make the whole trip that way. And to me, that's directional living in a nutshell. We're looking at just seeing our headlights in front of us. What is the next directionally right step? And trusting and knowing we can make the whole trip that way. And so a cross-country road trip is actually an amazing analogy to show the difference between destinational living and directional living. So in destinational living, as you said, you would pick a final destination, and you might get an itinerary perfectly plotted. Maybe you download it from the internet or whatever it is, and you're like, okay, this is the way I'm going. And that might feel safer and more secure at first, because you're like, I know exactly what the plan is. I know how long it's going to take. I know every stop. I got this down. It gives you a sense of certainty and control, potentially. But what it ignores is that what happens if there's a detour, or the place you thought you were going to stay is shut down, or even more, you pass something that you actually want to stop at that wasn't on the itinerary. If you're sticking to it to a T, you're going to miss out on all of these opportunities, and you're not going to be able to be responsive to your own inner desires or the external environment. And so instead, directional living would look like, let's take an example of, I'm heading from New York or from the East Coast to the West Coast, right? That's your sort of big direction. We're not talking about wandering, so you're driving around in circles around the country. We are heading in a direction. We just don't need to know exactly where we're going until we get closer. And we start to iterate on that. So we might say, okay, where are my headlights showing me, for this first leg of the journey? So maybe I'm going from New York City to Philadelphia. And then I'm asking, okay, where do I want to go from here? Maybe I talk to some locals. I find out what is, the fastest route or the most scenic route, or whatever the things are that I care about personally. The difference here is that it becomes your own trip. It's uniquely well suited to you, as opposed to following someone else's itinerary based on their priorities and their goals and their recommendations. So then when you start to get closer to, let's say, to the West Coast, we don't know, you could be going to the Pacific Northwest, to Seattle, or you could be going to San Francisco, or you could be going to San Diego. And as you get closer, you can start to figure out where you want to be going among those various destinations on the West Coast. And the perk of doing that is that you actually have more information about what you like and what you're interested in the closer that you get. the more experience that you have. As you get closer, you might start to sense a difference in the climate of the Pacific Northwest and San Diego and say, oh, wow, I didn't realize how much I don't know, hate the warm weather. And I really want to be going further up north. So all of those things are what are going to allow you to have a personalized experience. And that's where the authenticity and the fulfillment come in. Fulfillment is not universal.
Megan, in the movie, I hope you're going to see it now. I'm not going to do it, so I'm not advertising it, but they took some deck chairs and lots of beer and Pringles, and they seem to enjoy themselves on the way. I'm assuming that in your directional living, there's an emphasis on having fun. I mean, you're clearly, as you said, you felt programmed to go to Stanford and then Google. You're supposed to have fun at Google, but it's programmed fun. What is the role of fun in all this?
Yeah. So talking about the headlights, what are the headlights in real life, right? What are we looking for? To me, those are two things. One is curiosity and the other is joy. To me, those are the building blocks of fulfillment and the building blocks of purpose. So we're always looking for, where is my curiosity and where is the joy? And so again, this isn't to say, and joy is different from happy, right? This isn't to say you don't have to do any grunt work or things you don't like to do, but is there is there like a light and right feeling about it? Is this directionally right for you, is how I describe it. And we do need to get familiar with what that feeling is for us. And I talk through some of that in the book, and I certainly work on that with clients. But yes, I think joy and fun is a big part of this. But fun, maybe not in the, I mean, it could be the eating Pringles and drinking beer kind of fun, but I would say it's more of like a deeper, like curiosity fun. Like I consider this really fun. So to me, this is very aligned.
Yeah, I mean, Will Ferrell, I think his the most fun he had, at least with his clothes on, was going to Dunkin' Donuts. He spent half the movie trying to persuade Harper Steele, not Harper Lee, to go to a Dunkin' Donuts. Let's end where we began in the America of today, and indeed the Wall Street Journal. I referenced that Amazon piece. It's another interesting piece about homeless population growing, putting US on track for another record. It's very disturbing, heartbreaking to think that more and more hundreds of thousands of Americans no longer have a home. Of course, it's unlikely they'll read directional living. They don't have these kinds of problems. We touched on that earlier. But I wonder in your book, Megan, whether there's enough focus on morality itself, on making the world a better place for all these people who went to Stanford and then went to Google or Amazon or Microsoft and weren't happy. That's all very well, but some people might be watching this and saying, you don't need a book to explain how to live. You just need to help those less fortunate than themselves. You mentioned that AOC was one of your clients, who of course is in the business, politically at least, of focusing on those issues. How would you respond to that? That this is all very well, but you're only deepening the cult of individualism in America. Okay, you may not be happy becoming a superstar at Google, so you want to become a superstar in other ways. It might be better just to worry less about yourself and focus more on those less fortunate than yourself.
Yeah, totally valid critique. And I love that you asked this question, and something I think about a lot, actually. And my belief is that when we are all doing what is directionally right, what is aligned for us, that actually does typically mean being of service. Most people aren't truly fulfilled when they're in this cult of individualism. So I think when we can do the work, I think the cult of individualism is the thing that gets people stuck in these unfulfilled places. When we can refocus on what actually feels, again, truly fulfilling to me, it's almost always what is, again, unless you're like a psychopath or something, something else. But if there aren't any sort of mental distortions, almost everyone ends up doing things that they're looking and thinking about the world holistically, and they are the impact they're looking to have. And the reason that they became overachievers in the first place is that they care about having a contribution. But I don't think the answer is just, okay, I'm going to go work for a nonprofit, right? I have plenty of people who I know who've done that, and that does not yield fulfillment if it's not the thing that is aligned for them. So I believe strongly, and my book ends on this note of like the directional living movement, which has to do with all, like, sort of all boats rise with the tide on this one. And I think when people are doing what's truly aligned, they're bringing everyone up with them. And more often than not, they're doing the kind of work that AOC is doing when they're not coming from a fear place, which is what destinational living is. You're really more, you are much more ripe and ready and prepared to cultivate a more, communal, equality focused life and outlook.
Well, we did one show on something called The Alignment Problem, which focused on AI. I think, Megan Hellerer, your notion of the alignment problem is more human. Your new book, Directional Living, it's out on Tuesday. I suspect you are the next Tim Ferriss. I hope you are. It's a real honor to have you on the show, and I wish you the best of luck with the book. We'll get you back on the show to talk more. This is not an issue that's going away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.